Have you ever felt like there's something wrong with the world? And I don't mean in a way that you can put your finger on. It's not in a way that you can really explain. And it's not something that's in the news. I'm not talking about specific events. I'm talking about something deeper, something more widespread than that. It's almost as if there's something in the air itself. I'm sure you've noticed. I have. Have you noticed that people, they seem different lately? It's like the driver who tried to kill you over a parking spot or over the road rage incident, or how everybody's so reckless on the roads nowadays. It's almost dangerous just driving around. Or the stranger who shoves past an elderly woman without giving a glance, without, even considering her. It's like those stories you hear of people walking past like somebody on the street that's dying, or somebody filming like a fight instead of trying to help it. They're more concerned about TikTok views than they are helping somebody, or they're more concerned about themselves. They don't want to get involved, so they just keep walking by. They don't want to call for help because it might inconvenience them in some way. It seems like it's happening more often now, random attacks on subways or neighbors who lived next to each other for years but never spoken a word. It's almost like people are just too busy. They're cold. They're disconnected. Like something fundamental has been switched off in them. It's like their humanity is disappearing slowly. I know you probably felt it. I sure have. If you have, put it in the comments below. Have you seen people acting different lately in, the past few years? But what if I told you that this isn't random and you can possibly trace this back to a specific time, a specific moment, a specific place, a specific date, and some specific people who may or may not have released something, summoned something into our world that now has infiltrated basically all of human consciousness. Seriously, a philosophy that was designed to corrode the very thing that makes us human. Well, that's what I want to talk about today, because I think there was a spiritual doorway, so to speak, that was opened. And when it was open, it allowed these entities, these ancient beings from the old times to enter our world and kind of take over.
They're back.
They're back. And now they've returned with a vengeance.
Who are you talking about?
Set free into our world, the power of the old gods is unimaginable.
The old gods aren't dead.
So what am I talking about here? Well, in order to understand where this whole thing comes from, in my opinion, I think we have to go back in time. Go back to 1904, in a chamber that was built before the flood of Noah. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what you've been sensing all along, what I've been sensing all along, and I think what's happening to society as a whole. And no, it doesn't have to do with social media, and I don't think it has anything to do with pharmaceuticals. Well, that might be playing a role in it, but I think it's deeper than that. I think it's more spiritual. So let's go back to March 1904, inside the Great Pyramid of Giza, because this is where things start to get very strange. So inside the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid of Giza, there's a man who performed a ritual by candlelight. His wife, she sat nearby, uninterested in the whole ritual, uninterested in the occult, basically skeptical of the whole affair, but she was there. Then something changes. Something happens inside the king's chamber that night. Her eyes, they went they got that 1,000-yard stare. They went distant. Her voice dropped to a whisper, and she whispered something. They're waiting for you. Who's waiting for you? Well, the man in question here, the man that was performing the ritual in front of his wife, you probably know who he is. His name was Aleister Crowley. Yes, that Aleister Crowley, the most evil man on earth. He called himself the Beast 666. And that ritual, guess what it was called? The Bornless One invocation. Bornless. Like the one they're evoking wasn't born. And whatever responded to that ritual, whatever responded that night, would soon dictate a book that has reshaped humanity and found its way basically into every nook and cranny of civilization and bringing us to where we are today. Because a single principle came out of that book that basically reshaped our world, like I said. And what is that principle? Of course, it's do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Do as thou will. Do what you want. That's what we see today. Everybody just wants to do what you want. You be you. Don't worry about what is better for other people. Don't worry about serving people. Don't worry about helping people. Don't worry about caring for anybody. You do you. They'll be fine. You don't have to worry about them. Just focus on yourself. Do what you will. And it's clear, guys, that do as thou will, that whole principle has become the dominant, let's say, operating system of modern culture in general. And people don't even realize where it came from. They don't realize when you say, you do you, live your best life, and do what you want to do. It's basically an occult thing that comes from before the flood of Noah, from the ancient times, from the golden age, so to speak. Let's say, New Agers will call it Atlantean period, and us Christians call it the days of Noah. But I think I'm getting ahead of myself. So in order to understand what Crowley may have accessed that night, we need to go far back. All the way back to, you guessed it, before the flood. So there's a Jewish historian named Josephus, and he wrote extensively about a lot of stuff. But in the first century, there was some record of something he wrote. And one of the strange things he wrote about this tradition was about these strange pillars that existed. And get this, okay, because this is crazy. And I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically said that they made two pillars. One was made out of brick and one was made out of stone. And on these pillars was described the mysteries of the world, the mysteries of the ancient world, what we would call basically secret occult knowledge. And what he said was that the pillars were built, there was two of them built. That way, if one of them gets destroyed by the flood, the other one might remain. So they built these two pillars, and one of them was a redundancy because they knew that something was coming. They knew the flood was coming, and they wanted to retain this information. So they built two pillars. And what are these pillars? Here's where things get interesting, guys. And here's what everybody misses about this, because Josephus wrote this in the first century. The writings are still available today. But he says, think about this. He says that one of the pillars remains in the land of Sirad, something like that, to this day. So at the time of him writing that in the first century, one of these pillars from before the flood remains. So where's that land of Siriad? You guessed it. It's in Egypt. Seriously. What's in Egypt? The Great Pyramids, okay? So we have multiple ancient sources that identify the pillar with the Great Pyramid itself. And the prophet Isaiah talks about something similar, which is very strange, and there's a whole mysterious aspect to it. And I think we're missing part of that puzzle. So the prophet Isaiah seems to confirm something similar. What does the prophet Isaiah say? He said, in that day, there shall be an altar to the Lord. And the Lord's all capital Lord, which when you read that in the Old Testament, it means Yahweh. So there was a big giant monument, an altar built to Yahweh in the land of Egypt. So there was an altar that was built in the land of Egypt for Yahweh, for the Lord. And there was also a pillar built at the border also for the Lord. So what does this mean? Does this mean if it's referring to the pyramid, that the pyramid was built as an altar to the Lord? And I get it. The pyramid has nothing to do with the Lord, right? Because it's an evil place of magic and rituals. And I understand that, and I believe it too. I don't believe the Lord had anything to do with it. But Isaiah says that it was built for the Lord, as an altar to the Lord. If the pyramid, the Great Pyramid of Giza, was built as an altar to Yahweh, if it's the pillars that was mentioned in Isaiah and in Josephus, the pillar from before the flood, it's possible that this means that the pyramid was built by the Nephilim, by the fallen angels themselves. And I know what you're thinking, like, why would they do that? They were open rebellion against him. They're at war with God by all accounts. Well, one school of thought is they built it as trying to bribe God. Say, hey, look, we're going to build you this giant pyramid, this giant pillar. Please don't kill us. Please don't destroy the flood. Here's your gift. And the Lord obviously was like, no, you're getting destroyed. Your whole kingdom's getting destroyed. And we're going to start fresh with Noah and his family because your time's up. You destroyed the world, you corrupted it, and now you need to face your consequences. So is it possible that the Great Pyramid is what's referred to in Isaiah and Josephus? And there's other places too. And that it was built before the flood? I think the answer there is yes. A stone pillar, right, using their words, encoding knowledge, ancient knowledge, antediluvian knowledge, and perhaps even something else. What's that something else, you might ask? We're going to get into that. But before I go too far, let's back up a little bit, all right? And here's what we need to stop and address real quick, because it's something critical. It's something crucial that really needs to be discussed, because there's two completely opposite ways of interpreting the pre-flood world. And which one you believe, which view, changes everything because they really are diametrically opposed to each other. And that belief has real world consequences on today, on our modern world. So the ancient Egyptian texts speak of this golden age. And golden age of man, they called it Zep-Tepi. I think it literally meant the first time or the first period, something like that. It was an era where the gods walked among men. Gods, these are small g gods. They lived among men. They shared knowledge, technology, and all sorts of stuff with humanity. And the Egyptians credited this man, or this figure, I should say, this small g god named Thoth, with this wisdom. I guess he was the king of the small g gods, of the fallen angels, we should call them. And the Greeks, they called this same figure from Egypt, Thoth. I think his name was Hermes Trismegistus, some weird name like that. I think it means Hermes thrice great. And there's multiple like esoteric Gnostic texts that try and make the claim that Thoth or Hermes is Enoch. There's some old Arab historians that try and say that Enoch was, he was a fallen angel or something like that, and that he built the pyramids, he helped build the pyramids, but this is ridiculous. And let me be clear, this is the occult view, that's the New Age view of the antediluvian world, of the pre-flood world. Because by all accounts, to them, it was paradise. Atlantis, it was a golden age. They called it the time of enlightenment, where divine beings taught humanity the secrets of the universe. And to them, the flood, it wasn't judgment, it was a tragedy. It was a loss of humanity's greatest era. And that's why you see these occultists working overtime behind the scenes to try and open these doorways to bring this era back. And Jesus said something about this that we're going to get into. And it's kind of interesting how this whole story pieces together where you have one side and the other side, both with the same story, just telling it from different sides of the viewpoint. It's like a court case. You have the plaintiff and you have the defendant. So it shouldn't be any surprise to anybody that these occultists are trying to bring back this golden age. And they might have succeeded. So before we get any deeper in that, we're going to talk about the biblical worldview. This is the other side, the other aspect of the story, the one that the mainstream, the one that most people on earth disregard and don't believe, all right? But these two sides of the stories couldn't be any more different. Scripture tells us Enoch, he wasn't Hermes and he wasn't Thoth. He wasn't one of the fallen angels that helped build the pyramids. No, he was a holy man. He actually walked with God. And he was with God, and God took him away. He never died. God liked Enoch so much that he brought him up to heaven. I guess you could say he was the first person that was raptured. So this idea that these New Agers have, that Enoch was some sort of like pagan deity and was teaching some secrets, like these occult secrets, it's not just historically wrong. To those who believe that the Bible is the word of God, it's offensive. Because Enoch was a righteous man, and it takes a man who stood against the darkness of his age and turns him into some sort of strange architect, into some sort of mystical figure. And it couldn't be farther from the truth. Because here's the thing, guys. The biblical account of the pre-flood world isn't a golden age. It's quite the opposite. So on one hand, you have the golden age of humanity, all these occultists, that's what they're trying to return to. The time when the gods walked among men. And the gods, of course, are fallen angels. And the Bible lays this out specifically, that this is the time when fallen angels walked among men. Not only did they walk among men, they integrated with men. They taught men secrets. It's paralleling the story. It's just the other side of it. Do you see? Egypt talks about this golden age where the gods walked among men. It was the greatest time in human history. The Bible talks about this same age, the pre-flood time, when the gods, the fallen angels, walked among men. But it was the worst time in history. It was the darkest chapter in human history by far. And that's why Jesus talks about it specifically. And I know you probably know what he said, but we're going to get into that because this whole thing ties together in a way that brings this ancient knowledge, this ancient world, brings the philosophies and it brings the mindset of that all the way up to today. But I digress, okay? So Genesis 6 describes a world that was so corrupt, so violent, so saturated with evil, basically, that the Lord repented that he made man. It grieved him in his heart. Like, think about that. The Lord, the creator that created everything, the universe itself, was grieved seeing what happened. He was heartbroken because these quote-unquote gods walking among men that every culture talks about, they're fallen angels that are in open rebellion against the Creator. The knowledge that was shared, these are the forbidden arts of the occult, of magic, of black magic, war, sorcery, witchcraft, Satanism. It's lust, it's seduction, it's corruption in general. It's all of these terrible things, things that humanity was never supposed to know. And the result of this knowledge, it wasn't enlightenment. No. It was where a world that was covered in trash and filth. And the Bible says every imagination of the thoughts of his heart were evil continually. So basically, people were always evil. It's not some evil. It's every imagination continually. Think about that. I think if we're not there right now, we're definitely getting there. This wasn't paradise lost, people. No, this was hell on earth. So wicked that God himself wiped it from existence. I mean, this is total destruction, total annihilation, a cleansing, okay? So here we have two views, same era, opposite conclusions. Think about that. It's the same story. It's just different sides of the story. The Egyptians, the occultists, basically the world itself, the New Agers, they mourn that golden age. They want to bring it back because to them that was the greatest. Us, we're wary of it. It wasn't the greatest. It was the worst. And it is coming back. Jesus Christ himself told us that this age is coming back. He specifically said it. Now, again, I don't want to get ahead of myself. So the mystery schools, right? The mystery schools of Egypt claim to preserve this knowledge, this wisdom of that age, of the ancient times. The initiates of these mystery schools performed rituals inside the Great Pyramid itself. This is in the historical record, right? Going back thousands of years, including in the king's chamber. And they were seeking to reconnect with whatever existed, whatever knowledge, whatever entities, whatever energy, whatever spirits, you name it, whatever you want to call it, existed before the flood. Because this pillar, this stone pillar, this monument, this pyramid, that's what it was built for, to preserve this knowledge so that one day humanity might be able to reclaim it. And if you're saying humanity can't reclaim that knowledge, it's lost forever, that's not what Jesus tells us, all right? So let's go back to 1904, back to this ritual in the king's chamber, in the Great Pyramid, with Aleister Crowley and his wife. Because here's where things link the ancient to the modern world. So back to the Aleister Crowley story. So he performed this ritual inside the Great Pyramid with his wife, who was a non-believer. So she went into a trance and said, "They're waiting for you." Crowley spent days after this trance that his wife had trying to dig deeper. He was testing the communications. He was asking his wife about Egyptian mythology, stuff that she possibly couldn't know because she was uninterested in this. She didn't study any of it. She didn't know. She was just along for the ride because she had to, right? He told her, "You're coming with. Let's do this ritual together." Or there's a possibility that he knew that her being an unbeliever, she could be an open vessel for these things to possess her, so he brought her there as bait. He performed this ritual as a way to entice these spirits of entering her, which I think is the correct answer. But I think he brought her there to be an empty vessel, to be something that these spirits could enter into and talk to him. And that's exactly what happened. She answered all the questions that he was giving her correctly. She knew stuff that was supernaturally impossible for her to know. A few days later, a week, 2 weeks, I forgot, a short time later, after this ritual, she still was being influenced by this spirit. She said she can feel it. It was still talking to her. It was making things strange for her. So she brought him to this museum in Cairo, and she walked past this exhibit and then walked past another exhibit until she stopped at one specific artifact. They went to this museum. She started walking past exhibit after exhibit, and then she stopped at this one that showed this very specific ritual. And guess what the number was? The catalog number for that. Guess. 666. Seriously. You think it's a coincidence? Definitely not, okay? So while she was there at the exhibit, she stopped. She was looking at this carving, and she said to Crowley, she said, "This is the entity who's talking to me. This is the entity that we summoned." It was Horus. So then, a few days later, I think it was 2 or 3 days later, after that, Crowley successfully evoked Horus directly. And then came the dictation, a word-for-word dictation. He made contact with another entity. This was in his hotel room. And I believe the story goes that it was every day from 12 noon to 1 o'clock. This specific entity named Aiwass, would come into Crowley's hotel room and dictate to him. It would speak to him. It would give him information. And this happened for a long time, by the way. It was an everyday thing. And Crowley wrote that information down and made a book out of it. So Crowley sat in this hotel room every day while this entity named Aiwass, who claimed to be a messenger of Horus, by the way, sent by Horus to give this information, to impart this information on Crowley directly, dictated to him the Book of the Law. Think about this, okay? You have this ancient entity that was contacted from inside the pyramid dictating to Aleister Crowley a Book of the Law, which would become the basis for his whole religion. So Crowley described this Aiwass guy as having a body, like, I think he said made of fine matter or something like that. He said he couldn't really quite make him out. He couldn't quite see him, but he could feel him and he could see him in his mind's eye. He said this entity was tall and dark and he could hear him from over his left shoulder. So he would sit there writing and he couldn't see. If he turned around, nothing was there, but he would hear the voice right here and sense his presence in his mind of this big, tall, dark figure standing there talking to him. What does that sound like to you? This took place for multiple days. From that specific time, 12 to 1, he was writing down. This entity would come back and talk to him until the book was complete. I think he transcribed over like 200 verses that are in that book, and this would literally become the foundation for his religious philosophy that he would later call Thelema, which, by the way, had become very popular with a lot of people, such as the rocket scientist named Jack Parsons, who performed the Babylon working ritual, which opened portals, and that whole thing is tied to UFO lore. You probably already know the story, so I'm not going to get into it. But he was a follower of Crowley. He practiced Thelema. He was doing these rituals that came from this entity that was teaching information from the pre-flood world. This whole thing connects everything. Our modern world connects to the pre-flood through this one event. So what was the central teaching, though, in this book? What was the central teaching that was dictated to Crowley by this entity? You guessed it. It's that do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And again, that's what we see happening today, right? And what Crowley said himself, they said it wasn't about just doing whatever you want. No, it's about discovering your quote-unquote true will, your authentic person, your authentic self. And this gets exactly back to what I'm saying about you do you, right? Discovering your true authentic will, which obviously is an inversion of the Bible. And that's one of the calling cards, how you can tell if something is evil or not. If it's the Bible inverted, if it's the opposite of what the Bible says, it comes from the other side. Because the other side doesn't have any tricks. All they do is they take the Bible, they flip it upside down, and they call that their religion. It's just a counterfeit of God's word, but reversed. So they have no originality. The fallen angels, the demons, that whole thing, none of them have any creativity, any originality. They just copy the Lord's work and flip it upside down because they have nothing else, right? So, yeah, so like I was saying, originally, this whole do as thou will was, it was, by all accounts, it was more about that, doing your will over the Lord's will. It was about finding your true, authentic self. But something happened, and something is still happening. Over the century that followed, over time, time moves on, it started to mutate into something far more corrosive, far more dangerous, and far more accessible to the masses. Because here's the thing, and this is the most important part, the Book of the Law, this book that was dictated by this entity that was from the pre-flood times, it didn't just stay in the occult circles. It didn't just stay in the darkest corners of these rituals. It didn't stay up just with the higher ups. No, it spread, and it spread fast like wildfire throughout our whole world, through artists, through music. This philosophy has gone mainstream, and it seems like if you're not a believer in God, you're a believer in this philosophy. So it basically split our world in half. You have people who believe in God and Jesus on one side, and you have people who believe in the other side, do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And it's no coincidence that pop culture pushed this to the masses. I think that's why Crowley was chosen to receive this information, because the spirits knew. The spirit realm itself knew that Crowley was going to be the one to push this out to everybody, to make it mainstream, to normalize it. And that's exactly what he did. I think it started with the Beatles. Was it Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Band? Whatever that's called. So on that album cover, that's famously just covered with famous people, right? Famous faces. And among these groups of famous people, famous faces, who sits there? Aleister Crowley himself. This is the Beatles we're talking about. At the time, they were said to be bigger than Jesus. Do you remember that quote? The Beatles are bigger than Jesus? Well, that was what was going around at that time. Everybody was obsessed with the Beatles, and most people still are. I can't stand the Beatles, by the way. I think their music sucks, but I digress, okay? So John Lennon, he later said that the whole Beatles idea was to do what you want, do as thou will, okay? So they put Crowley on their album cover, and then they expressed his philosophy in their music, in their worldview, in their lifestyles, in the way that they lived. And then you have guitarist Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin. He became so obsessed with Crowley that he purchased this mansion, this house that Crowley did these rituals in. It was Crowley's former mansion. It was on the shores of Loch Ness, where the Loch Ness Monster was, which, by the way, some people said the Loch Ness Monster was a manifestation of some of these Crowleyan rituals. That's why it appeared. People got pictures of it. It came through some portal, and that's why it's not like a physical being. It's some sort of spiritual creature. Because there was a ritual performed right there. And by all accounts, in the middle of that ritual that I'm talking about, Crowley left. He had to go somewhere. He was called out, and he left the gateway, the portal, open. He never closed it. He never ended the ritual. So Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin was so obsessed with Crowley that he purchased Crowley's old house, which had all these strange rituals performed in it. And he even opened this like occult bookshop called, I think it was Equinox. And that's not it, guys. I think it was on the first Led Zeppelin album. I don't know if it's the first one or not, but on one of the vinyl pressings of Led Zeppelin album, maybe it's the third one. Yeah. It's the third one. The phrase "do as thou wilt" was inscribed on the record itself. So this is ritual, putting these words on the record that went out to the masses, spread around the world, and entered the subconscious of the public, of people in general. And guys, these aren't rumors we're talking about. These are literally documented facts. Look it up. You don't believe what I'm saying? Look it up. And the fact of the matter is this. I'm just scratching the surface here, guys. I'm just bringing all this information together in a way that's consumable for people, that you don't have to take these deep dives. But if you want to, they're there. So the thing about musicians in general and popular musicians, a lot of them are involved in the occult. And there's one extremely famous modern musician who is regarded as like the best drummer of all time. His fans call him the best drummer of all time. Even like non-fans call him the best drummer in our time, right? Comparing him to the greats. By all accounts, he's one of the best drummers ever to live. And this man, he embodies this Thelemic tradition, this Thelemic ideology more than anybody. And it's overt too. He's not hiding it. His name, Danny Carey. And he's the drummer for the band Tool. And fun fact, guys, maybe not fun fact. So I used to be the biggest Tool fan, like obsessed. I seen Tool live in concert, I think like 7 times. I saw his Maynard's other band, Perfect Circle, 3 or 4 times. His other band, Pussifer, I think 2 times. I even like came face to face with Maynard. He yelled at me, but that's a story for a different day. But anyway, I was so obsessed with Tool that when I had like every Tool shirt, and I would only wear Tool shirts for a while. And when I was in high school, I had dreads, and I'd wear these Tool shirts. Me and the people I hung out with were like Tool freaks. I used to say all the time that Tool is God. That was a phrase that I used to say, and it's kind of embarrassing now, but I was so obsessed with Tool that I thought that they were a god of some sort, like a musical god, like an entity, it was insane. But now that makes sense. When you take this information into account, it makes sense why Tool has such a grasp over people. Because the beats, the drum beats, the music in general, it's not just music. There's something behind it. There is a spiritual aspect to it that hooks people subconsciously, that causes people to get this obsession over the music. And that's by design, and especially if you take into account this whole magical aspect of it that Danny Carey, the drummer, which every song is obviously based around, was so heavily into. So Danny Carey was such a huge Crowley fan, is such a huge Crowley fan. He actually wrote the foreword to one of Crowley's magical practices books. He owns one of the largest collections of Crowley first editions in the entire world. His drum kit, if you look at the heads on the drums, they all have these Crowleyan magical symbols embedded on them. So every time he hits that drum, it's like he's doing a ritual. So everything he does in the studio, every time he hits that drum, every note that he plays is influenced by the spiritual realm, by this magic, by these magical symbols. What I'm saying about Danny Carey here, how every time you listen to Tool's music, every time you hear his drums, you're hearing a ritual. You're getting some sort of subconscious, like spiritual energy that's embedded in the music. And it's not crazy because Danny Carey himself says this. He has said in interviews that drumming is like a ritual to him, that when they're practicing, it's a ritual. You think it's a coincidence that this band has not only gotten so popular, right, but gotten so popular to a degree where their fans, their true diehard fans, are rabid. They think they're on a different level. Tool fans see themselves as like above the rest of the people. They see other regular music as like peasant music, and their music is like kingly music. They have a whole weird way about viewing Tool as a band and their music in general. And the band themselves, not just the drummer, they've never shied away from embedding occult symbolism in their music, in their work. But it's not just Tool, it's not just the Beatles, it's not just Led Zeppelin. The influence of this cannot be overstated. The infiltration even extends to hip hop. Jay-Z has been photographed wearing his shirt, "Do As Thou Will." And Jay-Z is also a high-level occultist by all accounts. I can't verify that, but that's what people say. And then you have people like David Bowie and Ozzy Osbourne who wrote Mr. Crowley. You have obviously like Marilyn Manson, Nine Inch Nails, Lady Gaga. All of these mainstream artists that are like obsessed with Crowley, obsessed with his philosophy of "Do As Thou Will." Read his books, study the magic, perform the rituals. These people, they take it seriously. And if they take it seriously, we should too. Because by all accounts, mainstream music, mainstream society as a whole has not only referenced Crowley, they've embraced him. They've embraced his philosophy. They've embraced his philosophy to the point where you almost have to utilize it. If you're a famous musician, you almost have to embrace his philosophy too, because that's probably part of the deal nowadays. But here's the question that nobody's asking. What happens when "Do as thou will shall be the whole of the law" becomes, let's say, the unconscious operating principle of an entire civilization, as mainstream civilization as a whole? Because have you noticed it, right? We talked about it in the beginning. People seem angrier lately. They seem upset. They seem like their humanity is leaving. And in my opinion, it boils down to this. The philosophical aspect of it is it's what happens when people, they embrace this "do as thou will" lifestyle, this mindset. Because when you just focus on "do as thou will," other people become an obstacle. Because your will is to do whatever you want to do. And if that person's in your way, well, then plow them over, because that person is irrelevant to you. So, whatever happens to them, who cares? That's what people think. Their needs, the other people's needs, other humans, their needs become inconveniences to you because it has nothing to do with your will. You don't care if this person eats or lives or has a place to live or has a job. You don't care. All you care about is you, your own life, your own progress, and where you're going, right? Who cares about these strangers you don't know? And again, this is an exact inversion of the Bible. It's an exact opposite of what Jesus Christ taught us when he said, "Love your neighbor as yourself." So you have Jesus telling us to love your neighbor as yourself, and you have Crowley saying, don't love your neighbor, do as thou will. That shall be the whole of the law. But for some reason, people listen to him. People embrace him. They embrace his philosophy. And that's not because of who Crowley was, because of, he died a heroin addict, miserable. No, most people don't even know who this man was. But his philosophy persists today, not because it came from him, but because it comes from the spirit world, because it comes from the antediluvian world, from the pre-flood world, when that entity from inside the pyramid told him, hey, here's the book of the law, you're going to write it, it's going to become big. Now this pre-flood antediluvian knowledge is going to infiltrate society. And like I said, Jesus told us this exact thing would happen. So yeah, it's not about Crowley, it's about the entities. It's about the spiritual. It's about what happens when these entities use Crowley as a jumping board, as a springboard, so to speak. So I don't think this is just a cultural shift that we're seeing. I don't think that's why people are being weird. I don't think it was an accident. I think this is actually a fruit of the philosophy that has been seeded through art, through music, through pop culture for, a century now? This was by design, it was planned, and it's been executed perfectly. And I think the thing that brings this whole thing together is Jesus himself and what he said. And I think the most important thing here that we need to understand is really what Jesus himself said, because Jesus was very specific when he was talking about this. He was talking to his disciples about the end times, about the end of the age, when he said this. He said, "But as it was in the days of Noah, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be." Think about that. This is huge. This is the biggest thing. And now look, on this channel, we talk about the days of Noah. We talk about some of the things that were happening back then, and we show how the same exact things that were happening back then are also happening right now. And when you take into account the whole philosophical aspect of it, because you have the actions, you have the technology, you have the presence of these beings that were alive and well during the days of Noah making their return, but then you also have the philosophies of the days of Noah making a return as well at the same time. It's all converging. It's all converging on this specific time that we are all living in right now, where it seems like that this ancient knowledge is making a comeback. It's making a return. So Jesus told us, when you see these things come back, when you see these things return, this is the specific time period in which the Son of Man will return. And again, who knows when he's going to come back? Nobody knows the day or the hour. It could be 100 years from now. Who knows? I have no idea. But you can look at the world, you can look at the events of the world, and you can piece together that we may be entering a time that characterizes what he called the days of Noah. And remember, the two views I was talking about the pre-flood world, you have the occultists that believe that the golden age, the pre-flood world was a paradise, the golden age that they're trying to restore. And then the occultists, they'll look at Genesis 6 and they'll see the same story. They're going to say, oh, look, even in the book of Enoch in the Bible, it talks about the same thing that the Egyptian Zep is talking about. This time when the gods walked among men and shared their wisdom with humanity. But then why did God destroy them all in a flood? They see the flood as this huge cosmic injustice. They wish it never happened. They want those days back. But Jesus also said that those days are coming back. Not that they might come back, not that, oh, there's a possibility. No, he said, those days will come back, as it was in the days of Noah. Those are his words. This isn't some like vague warning about like a moral decline in general. No, it's a very specific thing. It's a warning about a specific return. It's about the same spiritual conditions, the same entities, the same exact corruption that existed before the flood. The same corruption that God judged with the flood, that God wiped out. It's a very specific thing. It's not general at all. And now consider that Crowley's pyramid ritual that occurred, inside this structure, this ancient pre-flood structure. And it's no coincidence that the entity that responded to Crowley and possessed his wife was Horus or a messenger of Horus, the Egyptian deity. The very same Egyptian deity that is associated with the first time when gods walked among men. He was the God that was most associated with the pre-flood world. It's no coincidence. We have this whole thing, this whole story is coming together in such a tight way. Because the entity that told him this book wasn't some sort of guardian angel. It wasn't some sort of random spirit. Because that's what a lot of like adherents to Crowley will say. They don't know the whole picture because they're so closed-minded in their rituals and what they think and what they do. They can't see it through the bigger picture. Because they're not piecing it together like this. They see it in this closed-minded viewpoint. They can't look outside the box. But when you look outside the box, it becomes clear that what happened that day, what Crowley contacted, what gave him the book of the law, what gave him do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, that doesn't come from some random spirit. No, that comes from something that's much older, much darker, and much more sinister than any of them can comprehend. Because I believe it was exactly what it claimed to be. It was an entity from before the flood, answering the call of somebody who is seeking to restore what God destroyed. Because remember, they wanted to bring back this knowledge. Most occultists in general are trying to find this knowledge, this ancient lost knowledge from before the flood. That's what magic is. They're trying to reclaim that ancient magic. And that's what they're doing. These occultists, they call it, I think, the great work. They call it the restoration of the golden age. It's like a very specific thing that they're actually trying to do and have been trying to do. And they don't really even know that when they do this thing, when they're trying to restore this golden age, they're falling into Bible prophecy. When Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah, they're literally falling into the trap. If I was one of them and I was doing one of these rituals and I realized that Jesus called us out on it 2,000 years ago, I would be terrified and I would repent right away and say, oh my goodness, I had no idea. I'm sorry, Lord, but these people maybe they're too far lost, maybe not. Because I think anybody could be saved unless you commit the, unforgivable sin, obviously. But bottom line here, it's the same goal, different names. And not only that, guys, the Apostle Paul, he was writing to Timothy, and he gave one of the clearest prophecies about the latter days. And this ties into exactly what we're talking about. He says, and I'm paraphrasing here, that in the latter times, in the end times, people will depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. Do you see that happening today? Seducing spirits? Doctrines of devils? We're talking about the same thing here, guys. It's happening. Note the methodology, right? Not outright possession, not outright seduction, not obvious evils, but teachings that sound liberating. Do as thou wilt. I mean, who wouldn't want that freedom, right? It seems so innocent on the top. It's the doctrine that takes God out of the equation. It teaches you are your own God. And perhaps the ancient texts are correct. It is the same doctrine that corrupted the world before the flood. When you think about what happened before the flood, it all started on Mount Hermon. And what did those angels do? They made a pact. They knew that what they were doing was against God. They knew what they were doing would get them in trouble. So they made a pact like, hey, we're all going to do this together. We're all going to get in trouble for this. There's no blaming somebody else. We all have to take the fall together. So basically, they're saying, do as thou will. Don't do God's will. These angels on Mount Hermon literally started the do as thou will mindset. Because those angels, those fallen angels, they saw that the daughters of men were beautiful. And they wanted to make children. They wanted to marry them. Marry. So what did they do? They do as thou will. They did as thou will. They knew that it was against God's will. They made a pact. Hey guys, this is against God's will. Let's do it anyway because I want to do it. This is exactly the same knowledge that Crowley has brought to our mainstream today. It's the same exact lie that the fallen angels themselves whispered to each other, whispered to humanity in the days of Noah on top of Mount Hermon, in the subsequent time after that when the Nephilim ruled the earth. You can do whatever you want. You can be like gods, right? If you want to be like a god, fine, do as thou wilt. And the occultists, well, they call it restoring the golden age. And humanity right now, as you watch this video, they're being steered, they're being guided, through art, through music, through philosophy, through films, through you name it, through pop culture itself, back towards this view, back towards this ancient philosophy is do as thou wilt. The same exact conditions that provoked the judgment of God, divine judgment, the destruction of everything. So in the end, I think the question isn't, whether or not we are living in the days of Noah, because I think it's clear. I think it's clear that we are. We might just be at the very beginning. We might be in the middle. We might be in the end. Who knows? All I know is that we are there. We are in the days of Noah. And really, nobody knows the day or the hour. So that's not the question. The question isn't whether we are living in the days of Noah. The question is this: what will you do with this information? Put it in the comments below, guys. Do you actually see a connection here between Aleister Crowley, the entity that he summoned, the days of Noah, and what's happening to our world right now? Or am I just making connections that don't exist? I'd like to know your opinion. Please put it in the comments below, and thank you for watching this video. We'll see you guys next time.